The Verath ambassador hadn't spoken in 11 days, and the entire diplomatic corps was 3 hours from declaring the negotiations a biological failure. Dag Sorenson found out about the deadline the same way she found out about most things above her pay grade, by being in the wrong corridor at the right moment, pressing her back against the cold bulkhead, while Director Haverson's voice carried through the conference room door with the particular resonance of a man who had stopped caring who heard him. The Verath political bloc controls 17 transit corridors and 400 billion in pharmaceutical licensing, Haverson was saying. If Suruvel goes home without a framework agreement, we lose all of it. Find me someone who can get that ambassador to talk. Dag looked down at her hands. The nerve damage ran from her wrists to her fingertips on both sides, a gift from the Kelsar incident 3 years ago when a ship's medical bay had depressurized and she'd spent 40 minutes performing manual surgery in a vacuum suit rated for 20. She'd saved the patient. She'd kept her hands. The sensation she'd mostly lost. She thought about walking past the door. She thought about the 47 diplomatic staff who had cycled through that chamber in 11 days, emerging baffled and increasingly frantic, none of them speaking Verath because, as the linguistics team had helpfully explained, Verath did not have a spoken language in any register humans had yet catalogued. She knocked on the door anyway. Haverson looked at her the way senior officials always looked at her, starting at her face, dropping involuntarily to her hands where the nerve damage had left a faint discoloration along the tendons, then snapping back up with the guilty overcompensation of someone who prided himself on not doing exactly that. Sorenson, your infirmary staff. I'm a licensed translator, sir. 3 languages, 2 dialects, and 1 constructed pidgin I helped build for the Morthasi trade delegation in 09. She kept her voice neutral. I'd like to try. The ambassador doesn't speak. Then I won't either. The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence that meant a man was trying to find a professional reason to say no to something he couldn't explain his objection to. Dag had become expert in its varieties. You have until morning, Haverson said finally. We deploy the chemical communication protocol at 0600, whether you've made progress or not. Dag did not ask what the chemical protocol involved. She had read enough xenobiology to be fairly certain it would leave Suruvel in a state that the Verath political bloc would classify as something between assault and execution. She had until morning. The chamber was smaller than she'd expected. The diplomatic suites ran to marble-effect paneling and statement furniture, but this room was almost bare. Someone had been thoughtful enough, or desperate enough, to strip it down after the 3rd failed session. Just 2 chairs, a low table, a window looking out on the station's rotation arc where stars drifted in a slow wheel. Suruvel was already seated. The Verath were Dag searched for a word and rejected *beautiful as both inadequate and presumptuous, architecturally precise. Suruvel stood roughly human height, but the proportions were wrong in a way that was not disturbing once you stopped trying to map them onto familiar categories. The skin was a deep amber that shifted toward green at the joint lines. The eyes were large, dark, and currently fixed on the middle distance, with an expression that Dag's human pattern recognition insisted on reading as exhaustion. She sat down in the other chair. She did not speak. She did not offer her hands, or a data pad, or a translation matrix. She folded her damaged hands in her lap. They sat more quietly there than healthy hands would have, less fidget, less unconscious signal. And she looked out the window at the same stars Suruvel was not quite watching. The first 10 minutes were the hardest. Every diplomatic instinct she'd spent 15 years building screamed at her to do something, open a channel, offer a gesture of goodwill, deploy one of the 17 standard xenolinguistic first contact protocols the Corps had developed for situations exactly like this one. She sat on all of it. She breathed. Around minute 12, she noticed the vibration. It was subtle enough that she almost classified it as station noise, the background hum of life support and rotation mechanics that you stopped consciously hearing after your first week aboard any installation. But it had a pattern. It emanated from Suruvel's direction, specifically from the way the ambassador's weight shifted in infinitesimal fractions across the chair, a language of micro-pressures that traveled through the floor and up through Dag's feet, and into the part of her nervous system that the Kelsar incident had left intact. She couldn't feel it in her hands. She felt it everywhere else. Oh, asterisk, she thought, with the specific quality of recognition that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but the exact mixture of both. Oh, that's it. The Verath weren't silent. They were asterisk broadcasting. Every human who had entered this room had been so focused on initiating communication that they generated enough ambient nervous system noise, the tap of fingers, the shift of weight, the 100 unconscious physical signals of a species that had evolved in close social proximity, to completely drown out what Suruvel was saying. Dag kept her damaged hands still in her lap and listened with her bones. The linguistics team found her in the chamber at 0400, which meant someone had told Haverson she hadn't come out, which meant Haverson was awake and anxious, and about to make a decision she needed to forestall. She held up one finger as the door opened, the universal signal for asterisk wait. She did not turn around. Behind her, she heard the team stop, heard them register the quality of the room, the particular tension of two people mid-conversation, even if neither of them was making any sound that a human audio receiver would register. Suruvel's pressure language had shifted over the past 4 hours from something Dag would have described as waiting to be failed to something she was tentatively reading as cautious curiosity asterisk. The ambassador had noticed, somewhere in hour 2, that Dag's hands didn't move, had spent an hour, Dag thought, evaluating what that meant, had apparently arrived at a conclusion because the pressure pattern had changed again, taken on a quality that felt almost like a question. Dag had answered by doing nothing differently, by continuing to sit with her nerve-damaged hands quiet in her lap and her attention genuinely, completely on the frequency she was learning to read. Sorenson, Haverson's voice, low and controlled from the doorway, "It's 0400. I know. The protocol deploys at 6. Cancel it." The silence was different this time. She turned around. Haverson was a large man who had built a career on projecting certainty. Right now, he looked like someone who had walked into a room expecting furniture and found a load-bearing wall. "On what basis," he said carefully, "do you want me to cancel a directive that requires sign-off from 3 department heads?" "On the basis that Suruvel has been talking this entire time and none of us were listening." Dag kept her voice quiet. She was acutely aware of the pressure patterns behind her, reading the shift that she was choosing to interpret as asterisk attention. The chemical protocol won't make them communicate. It will make them incapable of communicating in the only register they have. It will be the single most efficient way to guarantee that 17 transit corridors and 400 billion in pharmaceutical licensing go with them. Haverson looked past her at Suruvel, looked back at Dag, looked at her hands, then caught himself. "How long do you need?" She did the calculation of what she knew versus what she needed to know, weighted against the cost of being wrong, balanced against the alternative. 2 more hours, she said, maybe 3. Haverson held her gaze for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he either found it or decided to bet on its presence. "You have until 0800, he said, not a minute past." He left. The door closed. Dag turned back to the window and the stars and the ambassador who had been speaking in a language made of stillness, waiting for someone to stop making enough noise to hear it. She put her hands back in her lap. She listened. The understanding arrived not as a single moment, but as a series of them, the way a photograph develops, Nothing shapes almost asterisk there. By 0600, Dag could distinguish 7 distinct pressure patterns. By 0715, she had mapped 3 of them to emotional registers with reasonable confidence. The one she was reading as asterisk assessment, the one she was reading as asterisk grief asterisk, and the one that had started appearing more frequently in the last hour, that she was reading as something close to asterisk relief. At 0740, Suruvel turned and looked directly at her for the first time. The eyes were dark and very large and held an expression that Dag's human brain was attempting to categorize and failing, which she was taking as a good sign. The pressure pattern shifted into something new. Dag sat very still and let it happen. Then Suruvel reached out and placed one hand on the table beside Dag's. Not on top of it, not touching. Beside it, the amber fingers with their green joint lines resting 6 inches from Dag's nerve-damaged ones, in a posture that mirrored the way Dag had been sitting for the past 5 hours. Dag's throat did something complicated. She was not going to cry in front of an ambassador. She was absolutely not. The specific quality of feeling that was working its way up through her chest was not something she had a clean name for. It was gratitude and recognition, and the bittersweet edge of asterisk finally and underneath all of it, quiet and deep, the understanding that she was being told something true. She looked at the 2 hands on the table, her damaged ones still, Suruvel's mirroring that stillness back at her. "You heard me," the gesture said. "You were the first one who heard me." Dag took one breath. Then she opened her mouth and said, in the clearest voice she had, to the empty room and the recording equipment she knew was running, "The ambassador is prepared to discuss terms." She delivered the translation at 0800 to a room containing Haverson, 3 department heads, 2 xenobiologists who had been flown in on emergency clearance, and a legal team that had been awake for 30 hours. She delivered it standing up, with her notes on a pad she didn't look at, because she'd spent the final 20 minutes in the chamber getting it right. The terms were not what anyone had expected. The Verath didn't want the trade framework. They wanted an apology, a specific, formal acknowledgement that the initial human survey team, the one that had first contacted Verath Space 9 years ago, had landed on what the Verath considered a burial ground and had not understood that, and had not asked. Everything else, Suruvel had been prepared to negotiate from the beginning. They had been waiting for 11 days for someone to notice that they were grieving and to ask about it before moving on to pharmaceutical licensing. The room was very quiet when Dag finished. "That's it," one of the legal team said. "An apology." "A genuine one," Dag said. "There's a difference." Haverson was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. "How did you—" he stopped, started again. "The nerve damage." "My hands don't generate unconscious signal noise. I wasn't broadcasting over their frequency." She kept her voice even. "I wasn't trying to talk, I was trying to hear." The meeting that followed lasted 4 hours. Dag was not in it. She had been formally thanked and released back to the infirmary, which was the diplomatic core way of saying your part is done now. She'd expected it. She sat in the infirmary break room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and felt the specific exhaustion that lived on the other side of sustained concentration, and she thought about hands. She thought about Suruvel placing that hand beside hers on the table, the deliberateness of it, the mirror of it. Her comm pinged, she looked at it. The message was from Haverson, short, in the clipped syntax of a man who typed faster than he thought. "Promotion deferred. Legal says your translation gives grounds for the survey team's original mission commander to face disciplinary review. His lawyers will argue your methodology was non-standard and therefore inadmissible. Prepare to defend your process." Dag set the comm down. She looked at her hands, the faint discoloration along the tendons, the stillness that wasn't peace but had become, over 3 years, something she'd stopped distinguishing from it. She thought about 47 diplomatic staff, and 11 days of silence, and an ambassador who had been grieving in a frequency no one had thought to listen for. She picked up the comm. "Ready when they are," asterisk she typed back. Outside the window, the station continued its slow rotation. The stars moved in their patient wheel. Somewhere in the diplomatic wing, a treaty was being written in language everyone could read, built on a foundation of silence and two hands that had finally, after 11 days and 9 years and one medic who'd learned to hear with her bones, found a way to say the same thing. Dag wrapped both damaged hands around the cold coffee cup, feeling the ceramic the way she felt most things now, pressure and temperature without the finer grain, and found she didn't mind. She'd heard what mattered. That was enough.